Hello, I'm Judy Halebsky, and today I'll be giving a lecture to second and third year creative writing majors. I'll talk about the process of observation. So we're talking about images, how to make images rich and vivid, and our focus today will be what is that process of observation that can nourish and propel images in our writing, particularly poetry. Our focus will be poetry. And what is it to write through the body, our five senses? So to start off, I'm going to start with a question. I want to ask the class, how do you get yourself in a space to write a poem? Now, I understand you have wild inspiration in the middle of the night, and you get up and you write a poem, or in the morning. But let's just say you have an assignment for this class due, and you haven't had a wake you up in the middle of the night, struck by lightning inspiration. How do you get yourself in a space where you can call on the poem, or you can find something to write about? So let's take a few minutes, talk to the person beside you, share your ideas, and we'll hear back from a couple groups. Of course, I don't have students with me today, but generally I would give a time for the students to talk and input and kind of reinforce the answers that are useful to our discussion today, which would be I read for an hour or two before I start writing, I go for a walk, I keep a notebook with me for if an idea comes up. So we talk about that. And we'll keep this question with us. We're going to read two poems today and look at some advice on how to write poetry. And keeping in mind, what is our process? How can we have a process of observation that will nourish images in our poems? So we're going to start by reading a poem by Wei Yingwu. He is writing in China in the 8th century, a Tang Dynasty poet. And we probably in this class already read some of the more famous poems by Defoe and Li Bai that start with an expansive image of the landscape and come down to a very precise, up-close observation, kind of a personal observation. Personal scale, I should say. It's landscape image to a precise image. This is the established form, and we come to this poem with that expectation. It's called Heartbreak at Our Old Dwelling. 10 years after leaving Luoyang, I visited our East Grove doorway. I couldn't look at the landscape, confronted by thoughts about life and death. Time has moved on, but her traces remain. We left here together, but I'm back alone. I can still see pigeons through the window, circling the courtyard at sunset. Okay, so the poem starts with this 10 years after leaving Luoyang, I visited our East Grove doorway. It establishes the time, the theme, the setting. I couldn't look at the landscape, confronted of thoughts about life and death. We're expecting a description of the landscape, the far hills, often a faraway look. And here is the speaker in the poem saying, I know I'm supposed to talk about the landscape. I couldn't look at the landscape, confronted by thoughts about life and death. What we see is often an empathy between the speaker of the poem and the natural world. And we can see that here. Time has moved on, but her traces remain. We left here together, but I'm back alone. This is a subjective experience of the place. This is the first-person narrative, the speaker remembering an earlier time, a personal history. We left here together, but I'm back alone, evoking some kind of personal loss or separation. I can still see pigeons through the window, circling the courtyard at sunset. So we end with this very precise image, this present moment. We have the window, which is framing the image, but it's also that this place is a window in time back into this memory. And the way the images function in this style of poem is that we have this landscape image that contrasts with this precise image. And here this poem maintains that contrast through having 2 points of view. We have the speaker today, remembering this time, this place from 10 years ago. And in that final couplet, this comes together in, I can still see pigeons through the window. It's the speaker in the present, looking at this place with this memory from the past coming through. I can still see. So then we've got these 2 moments in time together, circling the courtyard at sunset. And this circling brings in a kind of circular theme to the poem, this return of the speaker, and sunset maybe is in a later phase of his life. So how did Wei get to this moment of writing this poem? Right, we can envision he traveled there, this place sparked his memory and his imagination. We're going to go forward now to Matsuo Basho, who has a really helpful teaching when we think about how to work with images in our writing. And his teaching was recorded by his students, often in kind of mnemonic catchphrases, so you can imagine that they were kind of also, the catchphrase was a memory aid. And the teaching is remembered as, for pine, study pine, for bamboo, study bamboo. Or for pine, learn from the pine, for bamboo, learn from the bamboo. And we can interpret this teaching in 2 ways. One, as have poetry be a guide in your life. If you want to write poetry, be close to poetry. Read and write in a daily practice. Keep poetry close to your heart. That we can cultivate this practice. If you want to, learn from the pine tree, be close to the pine tree, study from the pine tree. You want to do poetry, stay close to poetry, be with poetry. Study poetry and keep it alive in your daily life. So one, we can think of it as a broader advice to poets, and I like to think of it as meaning we become what we cultivate. Cultivate this practice, train this practice in your body, in your daily life, and enrich and nourish this practice. Another way that this teaching is interpreted more formally is to stay close to the image, right? Through direct observation of the image to become kind of have a unity with nature and the natural world and do a close observation of the image rather than to look at the image that catapults you to some distant memory, some other association. Stay close to that image and try to work through whatever perceptions and memories and assumptions of what you're looking at that you bring to the observation. Try to put those aside and really see as though you're seeing this scene for the first time and look at the light and the colors and the subtle movements and write to that, right? So some scholars interpret this teaching as avoiding subjective interpretation, to stay close to the image rather than interpreting it through your own personal history or your own experience. And we can look at a haiku that's kind of an example of doing that. So this is Basho's haiku. The old pond, a frog jumps in, sound of water. The old pond, a frog jumps in, sound of water. So we have just the images in this poem, no first person, no story of how I got to the pond or what it means to me. We're just with the pond. The old pond, a frog jumps in, sound of water. So we have the images, we have the old pond, we have the frog jumping, and the sound of water. What image is evoked by the poem? What do you think of? What do you see in your mind when you hear the poem? I would give people time to answer that. Maybe we'd have a few suggestions. What is most commonly said, people say they see most often, is the ripples on the water. So 2 images that crash together to evoke a third image. So this is kind of evoked through these images, but that image of the ripples on the water is created by those 2 images coming together. It's evoked. It lives in the poem in that way. So what can we take away from this? What do we see through these images? One is we have the way these images are juxtaposed and work together. And the other is maybe how we can have a process of observation. And you're going to work on this yourself in your assignment. What I want you to do is find a place to go and observe. And you might choose some place that has a particular memory for you. You might go walking and come across someplace. Going to someplace you can sit and write in an ongoing way. I want you to write 3 handwritten pages, or you can use your computer and type. As you're writing, I want you to stay with the observation of what you're looking at. And if a memory comes up, if an idea, if something else kind of comes across your mind, go ahead and write that. Write that all in, and once you've written that out, come back to the image and the description of what you're seeing. So come back next time with 3 written pages. And our assignment going forward is going to be to write 2 poems. One with a subjective point of view where you're using the images that evoke ideas and experiences and memories, and another poem that is written, you're going to write 2 poems from the same kind of location and experience, but one is just going to be the images, just 2 images that come together. So that'll be your homework. It's been a pleasure talking to you today. Thanks very much.